the chair lady mentioned the idea of gratitude. And that really is a theme that is hinted to in this week's parsha. And the Torah tells us the story of the origin of two nations, Ammon and Moab. Lot fathered two children by his two daughters in the aftermath of the destruction of stone. And these two children, Moab and Ben Ami, became the progenitors of two great nations, Ammon and Moab. Later in Jewish history, the Ribono Shel Olam decreed that no male convert from those nations could marry into the fold. Why? So the Torah says, Al dvar asher lo kidmu eschem b'lechem u'v'mayim b'derech b'tzeischem miMitzrayim. Because when you left Mitzrayim, they should have greeted you with bread and water, whether it means actually to provide provisions or whether it means a symbolic gesture. It's not clear. But they should have greeted you with bread and water, and they didn't, and therefore they are excluded from the fold. So the question is, what is the crime? Okay, they didn't provide bread and water. The Jews had what to eat. They were eating damon. What is the grievance against Ammon and Moab? The Ramban explains that there were no people on earth that should have had a greater debt of gratitude to the Jewish people than these people of Ammon and Moab. Because their founders, who were children of Lot, only were spared from the destruction of stone in the merit of Avram. So their great-great-great-grandfather Lot was only spared in the schus of our great-great-grandfather Avram. So they should have had an immense debt of gratitude. And because they didn't show that gratitude by greeting us with bread and water, so the Ribono Shel Olam said that they can't marry into the fold. Now, Rav Hutner, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, once said that if you follow the Gedolei Yisrael, if you ever spend time in their company, you see an amazing thing, that to them, a character flaw, a deficiency in midas, was worse than a very severe avera. A person could be an idolater, a person could be a murderer. It wasn't as bad as a person who displayed a personality flaw. And the worst personality flaw, the worst, the one that if you displayed that you were written off, was ingratitude. And I always wondered, where did these Gedolei Yisrael get that from? And I think it was from here. Every nation provided converts to the Jewish people. There were nations that practiced idolatry of the most bizarre forms. There were nations that practiced other crimes. Their converts were allowed to marry into the fold, but not the converts of Ammon and Moab. Why? Because their flaw wasn't the flaw of sin, it was a flaw of character. And what flaw of character? Specifically, the flaw of ingratitude. And for that, they were written off. Can't take them in. It's interesting to note, though, and maybe this is a good place to point it out, that this law only applies to the male converts of Ammon and Moab. The female converts of Ammon and Moab are welcomed into the fold. Why? Apparently because they are able to rise above their nature and have that sense of gratitude. And it's interesting that the most celebrated convert from Moab, Rus, if you read the Megillas Rus and you see so many wonderful things about Rus, one thing which really stands out is her gratitude. Even for the smallest kindness that Boaz extended, Boaz didn't roll out the red carpet there. Boaz just said, you can come and you can glean in my field, you won't be accosted. Very, very minimal kindness. And the gratitude she expresses, says, what did I do to deserve? I'm not even worthy of such a kindness. That was the midah which allowed her not only to enter the fold, but ultimately to become the Ima Shel Malchus, the great-grandmother of David HaMelech, and ultimately the founder of the Messianic line. That's a karsto, that's gratitude. And that's why this is a very, very difficult week for all of us in the yeshiva, all of us in the extended family, but for me personally. Now, the loss of Shirley Weinstock Zechrona Levrach is not just the loss of a good personal friend and a friend of the yeshiva, and a person who has a historical attachment to the yeshiva, is a person to whom we have such a debt of gratitude, a debt that really can never be paid. Now, right now, the yeshiva exists. Baruch Hashem, it's been around. We celebrated the 10th anniversary a few months ago. So something that's been around 10 years, we tend to think it always was there. But it wasn't always there. And in fact, if you go back 10 years, its first steps were very, very, very much in doubt. I would say that if I was a betting man, I wouldn't have given it more than a 30% chance of starting. Really. I have to tell you the truth. It was not a foregone conclusion. And a group of people got together and did what had to be done. And each person brought a unique set of talents and unique background to that task. This person was able to negotiate the very, very, very difficult process of procuring for ourselves our first site, which was miraculous in its own right. And we leased a building from the Toronto School Board. The process started in June. We moved in September 1st. And normally we're talking about a process that would take a year and a half. It was just uncanny how that was done. That was one individual's role. Another individual was involved in fundraising. But the one person who brought determination and drive, who put the entire group together, who forced everyone to do what they could do, was thrilling. And I think if it wasn't for his determination, the fact that he believed this was an absolute necessity, it had to be at all costs, whatever the price, that's why it happened. And in many ways, he was a stronger believer in it than even myself. And he pushed me at so many junctures in so many ways. And, at this point, that's my life. So really, the debt of gratitude which I have to him personally, and which by extension every Talmud that ever learned in the yeshiva, ever will learn in the yeshiva, that currently learns in the yeshiva, every family that's been touched by the yeshiva, has a tremendous debt of gratitude. And that's something which, in the Ribbono Shel Olam's scale of values, is so important that, as we said, the only nation which is excluded is the nation which is deficient precisely in that area of gratitude. So that's why it's a very, very difficult week for us. It's a difficult week for the Olam HaTorah. Generally, as you certainly know, this week was the Patira of the Mir Rosh Yeshiva, who is probably the biggest Marbitz Torah in the world, the head of the largest yeshiva in the world. And he himself was an Ish HaPela. I spoke about it in the yeshiva this past, this was Tuesday. And I mentioned that what is particularly poignant is the fact that he was a Chicago boy. He did not go to a yeshiva as strong as Darchei Torah. The high school that he attended in Chicago until he went to Eretz Yisrael was in fact co-ed. And the amount of Gemara learning was fairly minimal. And after 10th grade, he went to Eretz Yisrael in the Mir Yeshiva, at least according to the reports. My wife is a Chicagoan, so she'll set me straight. But that's the report that I got. In any case, I mentioned that, there may be someone in this room today, here in Yeshiva Darchei Torah, that has the potential to fill those shoes. That someday he may be a Marbitz Torah on that scale. And we have to be inspired. The people that do great things for Klal Yisrael aren't necessarily the people that grew up in Lithuania or grew up in Mea Shearim or one of those places. Sometimes there are great people that grow up in Chicago, maybe even Toronto. And it may be someone in this very room, I said on Tuesday. And that's important. It's important that we should look at such people as role models, especially in light of the fact that he overcame such adversity and such debilitating illness to be able to do so much. It staggers the mind. So this is a very difficult week. So of course the question was raised, should the tea go on? And I think that when I was asked this question, the answer that came to mind was that if you would have asked the two individuals, if you would have asked the Mir Rosh Yeshiva whether an event which is to be mechazek the yeshiva, and if you would have asked Sruli about an event which is to mechazek his yeshiva, should it go on, I think they would have emphatically said that it should go on. Because I think that both of them demonstrated that their mission, their purpose, was more important to them than their own kavod and their own honor. And ultimately, Chazal say, what a person would want, that is his true honor. Because we don't honor people by symbolic gestures. We honor people by doing what they would want to be done. And I think that this is what they would want. They would want that a group such as this, which is getting together to give support and chizuk to a yeshiva. And by the way, the Mothers Association does so much that I think that the chairlady might have been guilty of an understatement. The truth is, in the life of a yeshiva, all yeshivas are the same, really, in a sense. They daven 3 times a day, they eat 3 times a day, and they learn 3 times a day, and they're pretty much the same. The difference is in the little extras. That's what makes all the difference. The spice, so to speak. You think about it for a second. Everybody in this room makes Cholent Shabbos. But what is the difference between the spectacular cholent and the cholent which is not so good? The difference is not the potatoes and not the beans. The difference is the spice. It's that little bit extra that makes all the difference. And the spice in the yeshiva, to a great extent, is provided by the Mothers Association. So it's important to know that what you're doing is something which is of supreme importance. And therefore, our debt of hakarat tov to you is immense as well. So I want to thank you for all your support, all you've done. I want to thank you for coming on such a dark, rainy night as this. And Be'ezus Hashem, your efforts should be crowned with success in the future. The topic that I was given to speak about is guiding your children on their career path. Now, this is a very, very important topic. And really, we could devote a series of many, many evenings discussing facets of this topic. I'm afraid to say, but it seems that the idea of work has lost its luster in much of the yeshiva world. I don't want to say that it's a 4-letter word, even though it actually is a 4-letter word, W-O-R-K. But it seems that the idea of work, career, occupation is something which is not as highly regarded as it should be nowadays. Chazal had a very positive perspective on the idea of work. The Gemara says, "Gedoyla melacha shemechabedes es ba'aleha." Work is very great because it gives honor, it gives dignity to those that practice it. And conversely, batala, idleness, Chazal say, is mevia l'dei shimum. It can bring a person to insanity, or ultimately, it's mevia l'dei zima. It can bring a person to promiscuity. So the idea of idleness, as opposed to being industrious and working, is something which Chazal were very, very concerned about. Why work? Why do we work? Why do we have jobs? So the truth is that there are 4 reasons why we work. The first is because, as we said, there is great value in simply keeping busy. The Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos that Yafet HaMatorium Derech Eretz. It's good to connect Torah study with working. Sheyegias Shnei Mashkachas Oven. Laboring in both causes a person to forget sin. If a person is busy, he has no time to do Averas. So being busy, working is a positive thing. For that consideration, we would say, well, the person who could effectively learn 20 hours a day, maybe he should do that. For most people, that's not an option. For most people, trying to learn most of the day would be, in a sense, the law of diminishing returns. The more time you invest in learning, the less the return would be. So you have to fill up the time with something else. there should be mashkachas oven, distract a person from sin. That would be working. But that's only one cheshbon. The second cheshbon is to support oneself. The Mishnah further says that kol Torah she'eni mo malacha, any Torah study which doesn't have work attached to it, seifa betela, ultimately will lapse, v'gereres oven, and it will drag a person into sin. Because if a person doesn't have the means of making an honest living, the only alternative is a dishonest living. So that's a calamity. So therefore a person has to work to be misparnes. Now here we come to the very complex issue that how do you balance the obligation of hishtadlus, human effort, with the idea of bitachon, relying on faith. Maybe I should rely on the Ribono Shel Olam to provide. That's a tough question, finding that perfect balance. But it would seem that however you find the balance, if a person would say, I'm not going to work, I'm not going to pursue a career, and hopefully I'll win the lottery, that's not going to work. That is missing the point. Now, there has to be some effort, some means by which a person earns a livelihood. But those are only two, I think, of the four reasons why a person works. The third reason a person works is because the world was designed in such a way that we all have to make a contribution to the world. The idea of olam chesed yibana, that the world was built on a foundation of chesed, doesn't just mean that it's the chesed of the Ribono Shel Olam that he created a world. It means the world, the nature of the world is people give and provide for one another. People that teach, people that counsel, doctors that treat, lawyers that give assistance, businessmen that provide products that we need for our living. The insurance agent who gives us security and menuchas nefesh through the products he provides. And so on and so forth. Right? These are acts of chesed which they are providing to the rest of the community. And a person has an obligation to be osek b'yeshuva shel olam. In other words, a profession which provides no benefits to anybody, just makes money, is sorely deficient in this area. Now the Gemara says that there were professional gamblers. There were people who used to gamble for a living. They would hustle in the pool halls or card tables. So the Gemara says a person like that who doesn't have a real job is pasul le'edus, he is disqualified as a witness because he's eino osek b'yeshuva shel olam. This person doesn't contribute to the settling of the world, doesn't contribute to the community. He doesn't do anything for people. He's in a profession of sorts, but it's a profession that makes money, but makes no contribution. So such a person can't be trusted, such a person can't be relied upon. As a person has to think in terms of not just how he's going to fill his pockets, but he has to think in terms of what is he doing for the rest of the world. And I think the fourth consideration, Rav Moshe Chaim Lutzato, the Ramchal, mentions in the Sefer Derech Hashem that another reason why we work for a living is because this is the dignity of a human being, that he's self-sufficient, that he can take care of himself, that he can feel good about himself because he's doing something productive and something meaningful. And I always wondered, where did he get this from? Where did he get this idea from, that working is really for the sake of a person's dignity? And I believe he got it from a Gemara. There's an amazing Gemara in Psachim which says that when Adam HaRishon was cursed, after the Chet of Eitz Hadas, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, Kaitz v'dardar tatzmiach lach, thistles and thorns will grow, v'yochalta as esav asadeh, and you'll eat the grass of the field. So originally man was meant to eat grass. So the Gemara says that at that moment, Zol Gulein of Demos, Adam HaRishon burst into tears. He says, I'm going to eat grass? Ani v'chamoiri yoichlu be'evo sechad? That I and my donkey are going to eat at one feeding trough. In other words, donkeys eat grass. So if human beings eat grass, what's going to happen? It'll be me and my donkey side by side with our heads in the feed bag. And that's what life is going to be like. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, okay, I'll tell you what. Forget it. We'll revise that. by the sweat of your brow, you'll eat bread. In other words, you won't be like a donkey eating grass, you'll eat bread. Now that by the sweat of your brow means many things. Because once upon a time it meant the sweat of physical labor. He says nowadays, Baruch Hashem, we have labor-saving devices to spare us from physical labor. But there still is the sweat of our brow. We have pressures at work, we have deadlines, we have all sorts of psychological perspiration. That's also included in the B'zeh Pechatech Alechem. So why did Adam reach out for it? Because the products of that sweat provide dignity, provide honor. I don't live like a donkey anymore, I live like a human being. And when a person does something which is meaningful, which is an actualization of his talents and his abilities, that is something that makes a person feel good about himself. That's another reason we work. And I think for these last two reasons, this is why even the lottery winners should work. Right? Even those people, those few people who are so seemingly blessed that they win the big jackpots, $20 million, $30 million, $40 million, and they say, oh, that's it, the rest of my life, I'm on vacation. It's a big mistake. It's true that they don't need the money, but do they need to make the contribution? Yes. They need to feel good about themselves? Yes. And therefore, maybe you'll change careers. Maybe you'll do something else. But not to work, not to make a contribution would be a serious mistake. So these are the four considerations, just to repeat them. One is simply to keep busy, because idleness brings a person to all sorts of terrible things. Number two, to sustain oneself. Number three, to make a contribution to the world and to the community. And number four, to feel good about yourself and that you actualize and realize your own potential. Now, if all these cheshbonos are true, then when we choose a career, there should be certain considerations that we make. And when we advise our children in the area of career selection, there should be certain types of advice we give. So first of all, we're talking about the sheer parnasa aspect of it, that we have to direct our children into fields that are lucrative. We don't want to direct our children to dead-end fields. There's an amazing Gemara in Yevamos. The Gemara says that it's comparing agriculture to business. Farming to business. Now, farming was a very, very wonderful profession. You know, people that farm feel very close to God. You know that? Because they're living in nature. They are dependent on the Ribono Shel Olam's rain and the weather he provides and the bounty that grows from the soil. It's a very spiritual thing, agriculture, potentially. The of us were involved in farming and herding. They were close to nature. So you'd think that it would be very tempting. People would want to do that type of thing. Rava said, if you have 100 zuz invested in business, buying and selling, every day you can eat meat and drink wine and you can live a good life. In agriculture, in land, every day you're sleeping on the bare ground, you're just barely surviving. Don't do it. Don't do it. In other words, what Rava was saying is, first it has to be lucrative. It has to be lucrative. Many people, pursue dreams, and then it dawns upon them that they can't keep body and soul together pursuing those dreams. I remember once there was a boy in Yeshiva who had a very great passion for art. And when he graduated high school, he thought he would become an artist. And then he modified that somewhat, and he said he'll become an architect, a little more practical. And then when he discovered that field was kind of oversubscribed, he decided to go to medical school. And so on and so forth. Now the point is, you have to be practical. In other words, it's very nice to pursue your dreams, but you have to remember that one of the functions of work is parnasa, to provide, and therefore you have to see. And these things change from time to time. There are certain times, certain fields are more lucrative, certain times other fields are more lucrative. By the way, being a Rosh Yeshiva is not one of the fields that, but it has other benefits. But that I think is a very important factor. When we talk about being lucrative, I mean lucrative not only in the sense that it generates a good income, but it generates a good income in a way that enables a person to enjoy the other aspects of life. But there's more to life than just work. Because if a person is in a field where, yeah, he can make money, but only if he works 20 hours a day, what happens to religious life? What happens to family life? What happens to social life? What happens to community life? He's a slave to his profession. Not a good idea. Not a good idea. And I can tell you an amazing story. Do you mind if I digress? It's an amazing, amazing story. That years and years ago, before Darchei Torah was even a dream, when I was with Rosh, so I used to give a women's shiur on Thursday morning. Thank you. Someone here used to attend? And once, at that time, I felt inexplicably that I was under a lot of stress. I didn't even know what stress was in those days, but I thought I was under stress. So I'd gone to the library and I'd taken out a book on tape about dealing with stress. Dealing with stress. And it was a very interesting thing that it said here that, a person can work hard, but if you want to avoid burnout, you have to find balance. You have to balance your work life with your family life and your hobbies and recreation. Everything has to have a place. If you do too much of one thing, that's what leads to burnout. That was very interesting. Anyway, so one day a woman came to me after the class, asked if she could speak to me. I said, no problem. So she came to my office and she says she has a problem. What's the problem? Her husband is a workaholic. Her husband is a workaholic. And it's really reached a point where it's affecting the family terribly, but the man is literally a slave to his business. So I tell her, I'm really not an expert in this area, but it happens to be by chance I have a tape in my car on this subject. So I'll lend it to you. You just return it to the library. And listen, maybe I'll give you some good advice. So a few weeks later, she came back, and she said she gave it to her husband. He listened. It saved our marriage. It's an amazing thing. But this is the idea. The idea is that if the parnasa only is lucrative because the person is enslaved to it, then and everything else has to be sacrificed. So there's no family life, and there's no religious life, there's no tefillah b'tzibur, and there's no learning Torah, and there's no time with the children, and there's no vacation. That's a catastrophe. So when we talk about something being lucrative, I don't only mean in the dollar and cents meaning. We mean in the sense that it should be a profession that, yes, there are hours of work, and a person has to devote a big chunk of time to any profession, but it gives the person the time and the menuchas hanefesh to live every other aspect of life as well. But when you get to the area of contribution, because here we come to a very, very interesting thing. Very, very interesting thing. There are certain professions of which the Jewish community is in great need. Now, let me share something with you, an intimate encounter that I had with my Rosh Yeshiva, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. Rav Ruderman was one of the great Gedolim in America, Talmud of Slobodka Yeshiva. But interestingly, although he came from Europe, I think he understood America more than most Americans. And he once told me a very interesting thing. He said that he once had a debate with Rabbi Aaron Kotler. Rabbi Aaron Kotler was the founder of the Lakewood Yeshiva. Now, you may know the Lakewood Yeshiva, so the boys aren't allowed to pursue secular education. And in Baltimore, the Yeshiva did allow it. So he had a debate with Rabbi Aaron Kotler as to which approach was correct. Should Yeshiva boys pursue careers? Should they not pursue careers? And the Rosh Yeshiva said something very fascinating. He said that he believes that Rabbi Aaron's position, the position that Rabbi Aaron took, was only a hayra'as shah, which means it was a temporary decree, so to speak, for his time. Keep in mind, after the Holocaust, the decimation of Jewish communities, there were no rabbanim, except a few refugees that came. There were no American-born machanchim. We were dealing with a situation where the infrastructure of the Jewish community was on the verge of collapse. There would have been no one to pick up the slack, no one to reestablish Jewish institutions for the next generation. So Rabbi Aaron said, therefore we have to direct all the people who attend yeshivas to devote their lives to learning Torah, teaching Torah, engaging in these professions. Now, you have to keep in mind that the yeshiva world in those days was a lot smaller. Let me give you a statistic which brings the point home. In 1949, I guess it was, in Eretz Yisrael, when the government first allowed for the exemption of yeshiva students from the army, how many yeshiva students were exempted in 1949? How many do you think? How many yeshiva students were there in the whole Eretz Yisrael that were given an exemption? 400. That was the number, 400, 1949. And the most recent figure is now over 68,000. 68,000. But in those days, we were talking about something which was so fragile, so much at risk. So therefore, my Rosh Yeshiva said that Aaron held that there was a hirasha for the time this was necessary. But when the Rosh Yeshiva was speaking to me, this was in the early 1980s. At that time, the world Jewish community was much better established. He said there was room for an approach where people were directed into other areas. But let me give you an example of an area where there still is a tremendous shortage of something which is direly needed by the Jewish community: mental health professionals. Because we don't have enough Jewish psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, counselors. We don't have them. We don't have them. And as we grow as a community, we become larger and larger and larger, the need is so much greater. So if a person is looking for a field to go into, do we need more Jewish accountants? No, I don't know. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. We need more Jewish lawyers? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. I don't know. Maybe we do. But this much I certainly know, we certainly need more Jewish psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, and counselors. And therefore, if a person wants to make a contribution to Yeshiva Shalaylam, I think a person should think in these terms. That if I want to work not just to make money, I want to work because I want to make a contribution, I want to satisfy a need that has to be addressed. I think that a person should be thinking in those terms. What is missing? What is lacking? What do we need to make our community stronger? And I think there are certain professions that fall into that category. When we talk about the fourth consideration, which is the person's dignity, there are now a whole new set of considerations. First of all, the Gemara says a person should go into a profession which is kala unikia. It is light and it's clean. Light means it's something which agrees with me. Whereas what's light? What's easy? Something which is agreeable, something which is consistent with my nature, with my personality, with my talents. That's what makes it easy. When I have to do something which I'm not suited to do, that becomes hard, right? So an ulmus kala means something which is, it's suited to my talents. It's appropriate. It fits. It's something which I have the ability to do, I have the interest to do, and so on and so forth. Nikia means that it's clean, means it's dignified. It's something I'm proud of. Something that I'm not ashamed to tell people that I do. So that's, of course, a very important consideration. Now, the Gemara says that a person, all other things being equal, should stick to umnus avaisav. He should stick to something that is in the family. Not necessarily so, because sometimes the parents have different interests in the children. But if something is in the family, you already have a head start in that area. Because I know that there's an eye doctor that we use, and it's very interesting that his grandfather was an eye doctor, and his father was, and he was, and now he has a son going into the field. There's certain families that this is what they do. So if you've been raised a certain way and you have those talents, then maybe that's a clue. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It might be that to the contrary. It might be that sometimes you see your parents do a certain job, and that's the last thing I want to do in my life, what my father did. So sometimes you'll do the exact opposite. But it could be a clue and something certainly worth giving consideration to. But a person has to follow his his interests and his talents. Can I tell you a personal story? An amazing, amazing story, I believe. When I was in California, lived in California, that's the previous incarnation. I lived in California, so I started the yeshiva there, which was suffering under tremendous, tremendous financial troubles. Is there anything new? No, but that was really bad. And it was in San Diego, and I would travel to Los Angeles often to raise money there. There was a lot of money in Los Angeles, not so much in San Diego, so I would travel. And I would drive, and so sometimes to prevent myself from falling asleep, I would listen to books on tape. So I listened to a book once, a very, very interesting book. There's a fellow named Joseph Campbell. You remember Joseph Campbell? Joseph Campbell wrote a series of books on mythology. Very interesting thing. And he did a series of tapes and television programs on mythology. And he says that the myths of a society really are ways by which the society expresses its deepest values, what it really believes in. So he says there's a theme that runs through the myths of many, many nations, which is the idea of the quest to find one's bliss. Where a person goes on a heroic quest to find true happiness. And you have the same general theme, dressed in different levushim, so to speak, for different societies, but there's a consistent theme of the quest to finding one's bliss, which really is the idea that in life, a person has to find something which gives him satisfaction, something that gives him joy. And I told myself, do I want to do this the rest of my life? Raise money. And ultimately that was the beginning of the decision to leave that situation. Because I was on this mythic quest to find my bliss. Now what was interesting that's not the interesting part, was that the next day, after I had this epiphany, this eye-opening experience, the next day I was reading the newspaper. And the newspaper had an interview with Bill Walsh. Who is Bill Walsh? I'll bet no one here knows who Bill Walsh is. Bill Walsh was the coach of the San Francisco 49ers football team. And Bill Walsh had won several Super Bowls. He was a top coach. And he retired from coaching and he became an analyst for NBC Sports on television. And then he gave that up and he went back to coaching college football at a tremendous cut in salary. I mean, he was paid maybe a quarter of what he was making as an analyst for NBC News. So they interviewed him and asked him, why did he do it? I mean, you were at the top of the world. You were an NFL coach, you won 2 Super Bowls, and you were a television commentator, you were making oodles of money, and then he gave it up to coach college football. And he says, I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell, he said. And I was reading about the idea of finding your bliss, and I said to myself, says, I don't want to do this. I want to work with kids, right? And I went back to coaching in college, at a dramatic cut of salary, because that was his bliss. That's what he wanted to do. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think that when you think of finding a career, it can't just be, okay, this is where the money is nowadays, right? And it can't just be that this is what's needed nowadays. It has to be something which satisfies something very, very deep in my own yearnings, something which I have talents for, something which I have an interest in, something that will make me feel fulfilled. It's my dignity. That's the dignity of work, the dignity of profession. And it's the mythic quest, finding your bliss. That's a very important thing. And I think that when you only take one of the considerations into view and not the others, there's a very strong likelihood of making a mistake. You have to find the balance of considerations. The consideration of the parnasa aspect. After all said and done, you have to be able to pay your bills and put bread on the table. Number 2, the aspect of satisfying a genuine need, contributing to Yeshiva Shel Olam, making your world and your community a better place. And 3rd, something which gives you fulfillment, which gives you satisfaction, something which is finding your bliss, if you will. And if you can balance these considerations, you're well on the track to finding a good career. Now, the subject of the talk really wasn't finding a career. It was guiding your children. Now, needless to say, that the considerations that go into guiding your children are the considerations which are important in selecting a career. So everything we said is relevant, but I think there are some extra factors that are particularly relevant to your children. Number one is, and I made notes of this. Number one is you have to know your children. And at first glance you think, of course I know my children. But this is an amazing thing that you discover time and time again that you don't really know your children. Because you know your children in the setting of the family, right? How often does it happen that someone comes and tells us something amazing about our own children, right? That we don't even believe it, let alone know about it. Your child is so capable in this area and so capable in this area and does this and is so nice and is so talented and so efficient. Who? Who are you talking about? Who? What? Are you kidding? Right? The truth is that often we don't know our children. And if we don't know our children, understand our children, then we can't give them any guidance. So the first thing is you really have to know them. I don't know how to do that sometimes. Sometimes they are very good at keeping secrets. But the Aleph base, the ABC, to be able to guide your children is number one, to know your children. And number two, and this is a pitfall which is very important to avoid, which is not to live vicariously through your children, right? Not that, I want my child to do what I never could do, what I never had the opportunity to do. So I'm going to guide them and force them to live my dreams. And I've seen this so many times. I remember there was a parent in the Yeshiva once that really was determined that his child be an engineer. Now the boy was a very capable, very talented boy, except his Achilles heel was math. No, I always say about high school that the problem with high school is that it's like you got to do a little bit of everything. You got to do science, you got to do math, you got to do this, and nobody's good at everything. So I tell parents, listen, he'll get through high school, and eventually, for a career, he'll do what he's good at. So don't worry. No one's good at everything, but he's good at many things. He'll find a career doing the things he's good at. But this boy's Achilles heel was math. He couldn't do math. Okay, some people have it, some people don't have it. But engineers need math. If you can't do math, you're not going to be an engineer. And the parents were pushing. Finally, I think it dawned on them that, he's not going to be an engineer. I suspect that the father wanted it because the father himself wanted to be an engineer. But if he couldn't do it himself, he figured he'll do it through his children. It doesn't work that way. And this is a mistake which you see often. It's important to know that children don't necessarily have the same talents as their parents. Often they have very, very different talents. We mentioned in the Gemara that a person should follow umnus avaisa. That's only all things being equal. Sometimes it works the opposite. Sometimes you have a person whose focus is in a totally different direction. Allow that person to develop and proceed in his own way. That's the idea of chanoch lenar al pi darko. Direct the child in his way. It can't be your way. It can't be what would give you satisfaction. It can't be about, my son the this, my son the that, my son the other thing. It has to be what will give meaning and satisfaction to that person in life. Those, I think, are the two pitfalls. Know your child and don't live your child. Guide him and direct him in accordance with what's good for him. So just to sum up, just in short, the three considerations generally, the consideration of parnasa, which means something which both pays the bills and gives you the freedom to devote yourself to every other aspect of life, something that makes a valid, genuine contribution to your community and to the world. And number three, something which is fulfilling in the personal sense, that it actualizes my talents, my abilities, is something which I have an interest in, something which I'm potentially good at, and something which I will enjoy doing. And therefore, based on these three major considerations, we have to consider the merits of various options. In guiding children, remember, Know your child and don't live through your child. I think that this is an overview of a topic which is very, very, very complex. Hopefully, Be'ezus Hashem, we'll all get it right. Thank you for listening.
I'm going to talk a little bit about Mothers Association, which was formed with a mandate to support the Yeshiva in its efforts to make our students' life more rewarding and productive. Mothers Association priority is to enhance the quality of the physical as well as the spiritual environment in which our boys spend most of their waking hours. Mothers Association is very proud that we continue to assist the Yeshiva in many areas due to our successful fundraising projects. High school is a 4-year endeavor. Thus, we are always looking for new parents to continue with programs for our boys, which they have become accustomed to. And anyone who wants to become involved in anything, please contact Malka Yakubovich, who is here now today, and will gladly take your names. Just to give you an idea of some of the projects for which Mothers Association funds are used, I'm going to list them. Mothers Association rents a water cooler with natural bottled water for our boys to drink. They love it. They hate Coke, any soda. They love bottled water. There is no soda machine in Darchei Torah, right, Malka? Or in Etzrayim for that matter. We also provide a coffee urn and 2 melchik and 1 fleischik microwaves for the Bachrim to use. That's to introduce them to the difference between melchik and fleischik when they get married, so they become these amazing husbands. We continue to sponsor the annual Sukkot Simchas Beisar Sha'evach and Chanukah and Purim Masibas. We also sponsor the various incentive programs that the Rebbeim set up. Mothers Association subsidizes the Rosh Hashanah program, the annual ski trip in January, the annual Shabbaton at Camp George, as well as graduation at the end of the school year. Every Rosh Chodesh, our boys are treated to a special breakfast, and we would like to thank Tovit Rubin for spearheading this project. She is here. If you are interested in sponsoring a breakfast or part of a breakfast in someone's honor or in memory of a loved one, please contact Tovit Rubin or Nicole Posner, and you actually get a tax receipt for your sponsorship. On behalf of Mothers Association, I would like to thank Yael Bienenstock for graciously providing her home for tonight's beautiful tea. Many people are involved in arranging an evening like this. Thank you to Arit Khan, Tracy Brody, and Mindy Harris for arranging our fabulous tea decor. Our thanks to Aviva Abraham and Shifra Lightman for recruiting all our wonderful bakers, to Rini Shields for recruiting our setup and cleanup crew, or committee, and to Itka Dalphin for soliciting all the wonderful prizes for our Beat the Clock raffle, which is later. Thank you to all of you who have baked for our tea and to all the donors. This is our only fundraiser for the Yeshiva. And last but not least, on behalf of Yeshiva Darchei Torah and Darchei Torah Mothers Association, I would like to thank Malka Yakubovich. This is what happens when you put me up here, Malka, for her untiring work throughout the year for the Yeshiva and for the welfare of the boys. I am proud to take some of the credit for guiding Malka in how to delegate and enlisting. She was laughing, she's not very good at that. And for enlisting all the wonderful volunteers, those who are mentioned and those who are not mentioned by name, who put this tea together. In this week's Parsha of VAYERA, when the Parsha introduces the episode of the Akedah, the Pasuk says that the Ribbono Shel Olam said to Avraham, Kach na es bincha, please take your son. Rashi explains that when the Ribbono Shel Olam says to Avraham, Kach na, please take, it's almost as if he is beseeching Avraham to go through with the Akedah, so that the other nations would not say that the first 9 nisyonos or tests were not substantial. Rabbi Pinchas Robert Shlita raises the question that this last statement is difficult to understand. Avraham had already overcome 9 significant nisyonos. Even if he were to fail at the Akedah, why would this belittle what he had previously achieved? Rabbi Roberts answers that Avraham was a man of great intelligence. He recognized that the Ribbono Shel Olam was the creator of the world by using his intellect. Therefore, it could have been suggested that the first 9 nisyonos were overcome by virtue of Abraham's superior intellect, because he'd realized that HaKadosh Baruch Hu ruled the world. However, the Akedah could not have been overcome based on rational thought. It seemed to fly in the face of everything that Abraham believed HaKadosh Baruch Hu stood for. How could a human sacrifice be requested by the all-merciful God? Furthermore, how would the Jewish nation be descended from Yitzchak if he were to die, if he never got married? The only way Abraham could overcome this nisayon was on the basis of pure Yira Shamayim, out of loyalty to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even though his intellect rejected it. This is what Rashi meant when he said that the earlier nisyonos could be rejected as having no substance. The Akedah showed the true sukkos of Abraham. It proved conclusively that he was not motivated solely by his intellect, but by an overwhelming level of Yira Shamayim. I think we can draw a parallel here between Rabbi Robert's words and the objectives of Yeshiva Darchei Torah. In the same way as Avraham Avinu's intellect and Chochmah was beholden to his Yira Shamayim, similarly the objectives of the Yeshiva are to develop the intellectual capabilities of the Bachurim, but these are at all times to be guided by Yira Shamayim and Shmiras HaMitzvahs. At this point, I feel it's important to mention something that happened very recently, very sadly, and Rabbi Breitowitz will say words about the passing of our dear friend, Sroli Weinstock, Olav Shalom. And this was a very short while ago, and the Levaya was actually in New York at JFK, and then he was taken to Eretz Yisrael, and it all happened very quickly on Motzei Shabbos, and he landed in Israel, or he was taken to Israel, and they landed on Sunday afternoon. 20 Darchei Torah Bachurim, 30 Darchei Torah Bachurim were at the Levaya in Eretz Yisrael, or at the Kvura. The Kvura was actually in Bnei Brak, it was not in Yerushalayim. Most of the Bachurim were learning in Yerushalayim. And this is something that is really quite remarkable. Sroli was a fixture in the yeshiva, and he used to regularly walk the hallways, certainly in the beginning. My son, who was one of the first boys in the first years of the yeshiva, was more concerned about meeting Sroli Weinstock because he davened in our shul and getting into trouble with Sroli for not being in class than he was about meeting anyone else. That was just the way it was. And this really is really due to their learning and the midas that they've learned over their 4 years at Darchei Torah, and that they continue to have such a close connection with the Rebbeim, with the Rosh Yeshiva, and this is something quite exceptional. At this point, I would like to extend our thanks as well to koshertube.com, little change. We'll be taping the Rosh Yeshiva's address and posting it on koshertube.com, where anyone can find many shiurim at no cost. It's a simple-to-use website, and we encourage everyone to make the maximum use of it.